themselves, and then I will introduce our topic. So let's start with Brittany.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Park. I work with Northwest Natural. I work on the origination of our renewables projects. Northwest Natural is the largest gas utility in Oregon, and we have aggressive goals for decarbonization. And so to meet those goals, we are not only buying offtake agreements, but also investing in projects. And currently today, related to this topic, we have 2 operating food processing RNG facilities, and as well, we're the offtaker for another food waste facility.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Ashwani Kumar. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Vanguard Renewables. We are an organic, farm-based organic solution provider. We got incepted in 2014. We are actually celebrating a decade this year. We started with 2 sites in 2014. We are almost 32 operating sites now in 2024, with more sites commencing. We are a developer, designer, builder, owner, and operator for these sites. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Gratz. I work for Hitachi Zosen Innova. We are a global clean tech energy provider, technology provider, I'm sorry. We are based out of Knoxville, Tennessee, here in the United States, with global headquarters in Zurich, Switzerland, and we are engaged in providing technologies for anaerobic digestion, both high solids and low solids anaerobic digestion, as well as biogas upgrading technologies to bolt on to these digesters to produce renewable natural gas. Yep, thank you for that.
All right, and I'm Suzanne Hunt. I'm the Vice President for Public Policy at Generate Upcycle. Sorry? We are a subsidiary of Generate Capital, so our story began about 10 years ago. Generate built up a portfolio of organic waste recycling and advanced wastewater facilities in the US, Canada, and the UK. And about 1.5 years ago, we spun out. So we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Generate Capital. So I thought I would give a little background on the genesis for this panel. And actually, Patrick set us up perfectly this morning. How many people heard Patrick's presentation this morning? Almost everybody. So did you guys see the slide where there was, all of the investment last year in ag digesters, all the investment in landfill gas projects, and then food waste was down here? So clearly there are some elements in the policy and regulatory landscape and ecosystem that's needed for this industry to flourish in the US that are missing. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. We wanted to talk about what we can do as an industry to advance these solutions. And actually about 1.5 years ago, so going back a little bit farther, the reason we organized this panel was my colleague, John Danan, who I'm going to point out because he's right here in front, and I were meeting with some government leadership in California about 1.5 years ago. And they said, we've passed all of these laws. We have 1383, we have 1440, and yet we aren't seeing all of this needed organic waste and food waste recycling infrastructure being built. Why is that? And we couldn't explain it to them in the time we had, so we went back and wrote a 50-page white paper, which we are happy to share with you. You can download it from our website, upcycle.com, to help educate these policymakers on all of the things that we need to be able to grow this highly complicated industry. So we thought we would just do a little bit of level setting right now, just talking about what some of these challenges are. And I think one of the things that makes food waste so different from, say, dairy AD is just the inherent complexity. You have one homogeneous feedstock for dairy AD, and with food waste AD, you could have 1,000 different types of material coming in. They could be in 12 different types of packages. You could have 36 companies bringing you the food waste, or supplying the food waste. So there's just an inherent level of complexity on that side. And then I thought I would let you guys share some of your favorite / most dreaded challenges that you think the industry is facing.
So for us, obviously, facilitated policy is a big barrier for us. So the expansion of definitions and timeline for these incentives and policies would be really helpful. Also, we have a challenge with having predictable treatment on the utility side by our PUC. So being able to know long-term how we're going to be treated in our investments in renewables by our PUC and having that stability is super important.
For us in Vanguard, I think it is important that we take anaerobic digestion process more for empowering the lives, making sure we support the agriculture, making them more regenerative, bring more fertilizer back to the soil. But at the same time, like most of the developers, I think I'm borrowing a line from the morning session, there are pioneers and there are settlers. We all have crossed that pioneering stage, and we are more of a settler where we are ready to expand. We are waiting for policy framework to stabilize so we can exponentially grow. Sometimes there is a risk of policies being in an on and off mode, and that's a huge risk to bring in a lot of investment to the space. But at the same time, my internal challenge through this process has been how do we exponentially grow and make it more robust and more predictable as we go future.
From my side, one of the major challenges is permitting, obviously. What Suzanne mentioned, that agricultural systems are relatively easy. There's one feedstock and it's located on an agricultural scenario or plant, relatively easy to permit. If you are talking food waste digestion systems, they are very often located in urban environments. And obviously, they should be as close as possible to the feedstock source. And with that comes challenges as to the old, I'm all for diverting organics from landfills, but don't do it where I can see it from my house type of scenario. And that is a challenge sometimes. And a lot of times when you go into a municipality or urban area, the permitting authorities do not really know what to do with anaerobic digestion. Now, in the state of California, it's relatively easy because they singled it out as a technology piece away from other waste management scenarios. But a lot of other states, anaerobic digestion is a white sheet of paper. They don't know how to handle it. And so permitting can become very tedious, and it's an educational process to the permitting authorities. So that is a big challenge. Another challenge is feedstock security. In a farm application, you have cow manure coming day in, day out, every day. And it's relatively simple. You don't have to pay for it, you don't get paid for it, and you're making gas out of it. In a food waste diversion scenario, there is competition for that feedstock. There is landfills, there is composting operations, there is anaerobic digesters, and a lot of these food waste diversion projects depend on tipping fees. And with that, it becomes competitive because you need a certain tipping fee to make your economic case work. And if you don't get that, you don't have a leg to stand on. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm sure we get into other subject matters here.
Those were all really important. I would just pile on top of that digestate management. So that's another one of our challenges. We have all of that high liquid digestate that is, not efficient to move long distances. So we definitely need to work on optimizing how we manage the digestate and finding ways to optimize it as a green fertilizer and make it more valuable. And then the other thing I would just mention is from the investor perspective, the CapEx needed to build these digesters can be much, much higher than some of the other digesters. So a high solids food waste AD can cost, something in the range of $150 to $200 million. There's not, that limits the world of potential investors somewhat compared to something that's more in the $30 to $50 million range. So earlier today, Tom and I were talking, and he laid out his 5 things that are needed for a food waste AD to be successful. So I'm going to put you on the spot to give us your 5.
All right, so I say there's 5 puzzle pieces to a successful project. One of them is feedstock. So you need to contract your feedstock. And the second of them is technology, which is relatively easy because there's plenty of resourceful and proper technology providers out there. The third one is the site. In an urban environment, sometimes that can be a big challenge. If you're talking major metropolitan areas, land is at a premium. And to site something can be challenging. And that kind of ties into the permitting side as well. And then there's offtake. What you do with residuals, not only the gas, which can be electricity or RNG. That's where Brittany comes in, for instance. And then if you have those four pieces together, you can go to the fifth piece, which is financing. If any of those four pieces is missing, then unless you finance it off the balance sheet, which is hard to do on a $100 million project, you will have to have all four puzzle pieces that I just mentioned in place for a financial partner to go out there and lend you the money.
Yep. Did he miss any, guys? Do you want to jump in with any additional pieces?
Also the interconnection as well. That's my only addition.
So you bring up the interconnection, and as our utility colleague on the panel, I think a lot of folks in this room have probably, at some point in their career, had a challenging experience with a utility. So what advice would you give to folks I mean, obviously your utility is out there, facilitating this industry, and we appreciate that. But what advice would you give to folks in the industry in terms of how to approach and work productively with their utility partners?
I definitely set myself up for that one. Okay, so first off, I want to answer your question in two different parts. So the first one is what is some tips I give to you to be successful? And the second part is what are we doing as a utility to facilitate these interconnections for the future? So on the first half, obviously, engage early as possible with your utility for the interconnection. Your utility will be able to tell you how far your piping distance is from your interconnect location. They'll be able to tell you if there's enough takeaway. And these are really important in knowing if your project's going to pencil or not. Us at Northwest Natural, we do that work for free. We'll give you a Class 5 estimate. Some other utilities charge, but still, it's really important to engage your utility early to make sure that your site location is going to work or is feasible for that project. Additionally, when you engage with your utility early, ask for their specifications and their interconnection agreement. So the specifications are different based on the utility that you're interconnecting is. There's no international standard. So it's really important for you when you're working on the financing of your project to know what you're going to have to meet for the specification. So ask for that ahead of time, so there's no surprises. As far as how are we trying to facilitate these projects for interconnection on our system? So we understand that RNG projects are super important for decarbonizing piped energy systems for the future. So we're trying to be as facilitative as possible to those developers who are trying to interconnect. That being said, thank you for your patience in working with us as a utility, because for many, many years, we just had fossil molecules, and now we're trying to, just in the recent history, adjust our system so we can allow things like hydrogen and RNG on our distribution systems. And so when we created our specs originally, it was on the best information at the time, but right now we're working on revamping those and updating them. So some things that we're doing as best practices is that we're trying to streamline the requirements for RNG. So our specifications, we originally asked for more analysis, continuous analysis, so we're reducing those requirements. That should save developers about $200,000 in instrumentation that they previously had to do. We're also prescripting better our methods for lab analysis. We require lab analysis every 3 months, so you'll be able to get that as part of our specifications up front. You'll know exactly what lab analysis you have to do when you're interconnecting to our system. And the third really important thing that we're trying to do is, as our system works, not speaking on behalf of other utilities, but we are the ones who build the interconnection system. And so we are trying to standardize the interconnection skid as well as our monitoring and instrumentation equipment. So this will allow us to have off-the-shelf equipment that's going to reduce lead times. And when we pass on those costs to the developer, hopefully reduce the cost to developers because it's off-the-shelf system. We're not paying for design every time. We just order it, we install it. We're really good at installing it because we install these everywhere. So those are some of the updates that we're trying to do and implement to make it easier for you folks. But yes, we're working with you.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And Ashwani, you have been involved in the development of what, 100 digesters throughout your career. What gems of wisdom do you have for the folks in this room?
I'll start with permitting, and Tom mentioned that, but just to elaborate on that, like it's based at federal level, state level, and also on a local level. And there is a lot of misinformation that has come off in last couple of years, especially with the social media emergence. It's hard to contain the misinformation, and how to counter that is a huge challenge for companies like us. Education is the only way to confront this, and this education needs to go at different levels. It needs to go to the elected officials, public at large, and of course, the permitting and regulatory agencies. We also, in the biogas industry, should be more open to working with universities and professors and more prominent people within the space, and make sure that we publicize most of this information as much as we can. The second challenge that I struggle with is Vanguard especially is in the voluntary gas sales market, and having a common acceptable carbon intensity calculation method is so difficult, especially even within the country, leave alone if you're trying to get those credits from US to EU. That makes it even more complex. So there are certain limitations with the GREET model, and it's a bigger discussion, but I will limit it to these three concerns and topics, not dwelling into the technical side of things.
And so what would, any of you can take this, what would you recommend in terms of harmonizing these different standards so that the industry can scale faster?
So I would say today, the CAR framework, the EPA, which laid out and came up with this GREET model, and they keep up revising and updating them. But at the same time, American Biogas Council is also setting up their method on how do we reduce the carbon. I think fundamentally the way we calculate the carbon intensities in US is different compared to how the European Union calculates it. So we should not only create a system which, and our projects have become a lot more complex. They are no longer a simple farm project, so they're not just co-digestion of manure and food waste. Our projects are a lot more complex. We are bringing in solar panels into it. We are looking at sustainable aviation fuels. We are looking at green hydrogen. We are generating our own electrical energy and stuff like that. So just relying on GREET maybe is not a solution. I think we have to work with agencies like American Biogas Council, say, for example, reinforce their carbon modeling, and also try to align that modeling with the European Union way of calculating. So
I think you might have some folks that disagree with you. I think we're going to open it up for questions from all of you guys in a little while. So have your questions ready, and feel free to give any of us a hard time about any of these things. There's probably a GREET modeler in the room right now. So one of the things from a go, no go kind of perspective when, and a given investor is deciding on whether they should invest in a project is risk, right? So maybe we should spend a few minutes just talking about strategies for risk reduction. I will throw out one of our favorites that we talk about at Generate and Generate Upcycle, and that's de-risking the development capital. So for years and years in the US, there have been sort of these start-stop policy programs, start-stop grant programs, and the end result is that we haven't scaled a massive food waste digestion industry. We've just had sort of these starts and stops. And as you were mentioning, Ashwani, we really need to create a robust policy framework and stabilize that policy framework. And meanwhile, our partners in government are saying, hey, we have very limited budgets, public funds are scarce, we have to use them responsibly. So to leverage those scarce public funds as much as possible, instead of providing grants for like the CapEx, which is, big numbers, why not use grant money to help pay for development funding? And that's where your highest risk is and your lower dollar amounts are. So I'm gonna kick us off with that suggestion. Let's convince our policymakers to do that. And that's your homework. And what other de-risking, education is sort of one of these catch-all things, and we can talk more about that in a minute, but what other de-risking strategies would you guys suggest?
Okay, if I start. So development cycle starts with siting. First of all, we need to have a site, and it can be in the city, or most of Vanguard projects, say, for example, are farm-based. And we try to leverage this power of digestate, applying back on the land and for regenerative agricultural use and recovering nutrients. But siting is very important, not only because of zoning requirements, and there is a plethora of check and balances that you have to go through in terms of emissions, in terms of traffic management, the local zoning and stuff like that. But on top of it, the permitting requirements, how do we manage the digestate? But then immediately after this is also the feedstock, from where it is coming from, how much fuel are we spending in hauling that waste, what kind of technical pre-processing requirements do we have, and the whole engineering around the design of it. And in the end, of course, there is offtake requirements, and how do we discharge on the back end the digestate as well as the RNG that we are producing. Is there interconnect availability? If there is interconnect, is there a gas sales that we can do? So it just doesn't limit it to that. There is also regional infrastructure development requirements. Sometimes the road doesn't have the loading capacity. So there is a lot of research, there is a lot of work. Generally, I would say by the time you decide you have to do a project, and by the time you think you are ready to put a shovel in the ground, you're looking at 12 to 16 months, just making sure you're checking off all the boxes before the project is shovel ready.
And then,
So Ashwani went to the ticking the boxes, dot your I's, cross your T's. Do you want to go policy direction with this?
I was going to add on
No,
offtake.
go.
Okay. So part of the reason why we are able to de-risk as a utility our projects is that we're able to invest in projects and have a long-term offtake on them. And so from the utility perspective, we're going to be here for a long time, or we've been here for a long time. And so we're a really steady, stable market. And so our partners, we try to de-risk their projects by providing them that long-term offtake agreement. We are not selling those RTCs in any kind of market. We're retiring them ourselves to decarbonize our utility. And so we are low risk as far as we don't fluctuate with the market. We just know that we need to decarbonize our system. We're going to retire those credits on behalf of our customers. And so because of that, we're able to provide that long-term revenue source as a utility. So that's one of the ways we try to help de-risk, as well as for our assets or our development projects that we invest in. We're also a long-term partner there. We know that we have to decarbonize our system once again. So we look to partner on projects and build projects that we will be partnered on for a long time, for 20 years. We're okay providing capital up front, and we're not trying to get as much return on investment as we can on the front load of the project. So we're able to provide capital with long-term benefits to our project partners.
Long-term offtake contracts, it's music to our ears. But those contracts have to be also at appropriate pricing, right? So maybe let's talk a little bit about how to make the numbers work. So,
I have one more point that I want to tag on to Ashwani's comments here. Before the siting and everything else, or while you're doing the siting and all the investigation with traffic management. So I think a very, very important thing is community engagement from the early start. I've seen projects fail where everybody went through, or the developer went through the development steps, the siting steps, did the environmental impact study, and feedstock was secured and everything else. And oh, by the way, one boundary line of that property was in a different county. And they conveniently or accidentally forgot to send notice to public outreach for the neighboring county. and that project eventually got shut down and did not move forward. So community engagement is very, very important, and explain to everybody, not only the community, but also the fire marshal. You know, they don't know. We have a plant in San Luis Obispo, California, and when we originally went to the community and said we are building an anaerobic digester next to the airport, they said, holy moly, they're building a methane bomb right next to the runway, and the runway is from here to the doors back there. So to make people understand what it is that you're doing, what the safety measures are in place is very, very important and cannot be forgotten. And then the feedstock, one word to feedstock. Feedstock is very important to understand, not only from a securing feedstock standpoint and getting that under contract, but also feedstock drives technology very often, more often than not, actually. If there's different technologies, there's low solids and high solids technologies, and not all works for all feedstocks. Majority of plants out there that are built in this world, I'd say maybe, if I had to guess, 85% of all anaerobic digestion plants are low solids, wet type digestion plants, because feedstocks are clean, they can be slurried and pumped around, very easy to handle. Some feedstock collection programs don't lend themselves to that type of technology, and that's where the high solids comes in. They're commingled with green waste. They might be heavily contaminated, such as organic fractions from municipal solid waste that has a lot of glass, clay, sand, and other contaminants in it that can cause and wreak havoc on a conventional wet digestion plant. So feedstock needs to be understood and studied before you select the technology.
Yep. So on the making the numbers work side of things, you had an interesting story. We talked quite a bit about tip fees and how do we get tip fee support and that kind of thing. You had an interesting case study from San Luis Obispo about getting actual more certainty on the feedstock contracts. Do you want to share that story?
Certainly. The challenge in San Luis Obispo and in many areas where you have franchise contracts was that the county wanted an anaerobic digestion project, and their compost facility was shut down because of various different complaints, and the county needed a solution, and it's a very remote county, so if you have to truck organic waste out of the county, it becomes very expensive. So we were invited to come into the county and provide technology, and Hitachi at the time said, we are willing to finance, design, build, own, operate this facility. However, we need a 20-year feedstock commitment in order to get our financial partners to buy into that. Now, with that said, the waste hauler said, there is no way I can give you a 20-year feedstock commitment because I have 13 municipalities that I have franchise contracts with, and every municipality has a different term on their franchise contract. One was only 3 years left, the other one was 7 years, and anything in between. So what happened is the county passed a special ordinance that said, okay, municipality ABC, if you want to be part of that project, which you always wanted, you basically need to commit to the feedstock and extend your feedstock contract with the hauler, then ultimately was able to give us the commitment in feedstock. Now that might be different in a large urban environment because there's plenty of feedstock around, but in this particular case, that was absolutely necessary because it's such a remote county, you couldn't bring in waste from other counties, wasn't economically feasible. So there was an interesting challenge there with this particular project.
Super. Anyone else want to say anything about the feedstock? Otherwise, I was going to pivot to the education topic that you guys had brought up previously. Move around. All right. It's so late in the day and it's so echoey in here. You guys still awake out there? Yeah? All right. All right, so education, and this might sound a little funny to a bunch of, folks that are building projects and, making things happen in the world. But this is I'm really glad you brought up community engagement, because it's absolutely critical. Anytime you say waste, people's alarm bells and red flags go up. So you have to do lots and lots and lots of educating and communicating. So besides the local community, like, who else would you guys recommend to folks that they educate?
Yes, so we highly recommend you get involved in educating your PUC, your local PUCs, and there's multiple reasons for this. Once again, from the utilities perspective, this is one of the challenges we run into. We have to educate our local PUCs on how can we decarbonize our piped energy systems, and how we can use our dual energy systems, our electricity system and our gas system together to decarbonize. And so our PUCs need to know what is an RTC, for example. We also encourage educating your PUC on the importance of resiliency and asking for resiliency to be priced in the decarbonization efforts or models. We also encourage you all to definitely get involved and start advocating with your PUC on these type of RNG and hydrogen projects. And the reason for that is because as a utility, there's only so far we can self-advocate. So we need our industry partners and experts to help us with this educational effort.
I think this education cannot be overemphasized. Like, most of us are in the weeds of development, and we think this is something which is very common knowledge, but you'll be surprised how uncommon this is. I agree with Brittany that PUC definitely, the local elected officials, yes, public, yes, regulatory agencies, absolutely, yes. Even within the company, between different departments, education, absolutely, yes. It starts from the PUC, most probably, siting and permitting, and it goes all the way down to the driver, the hauler that brings the waste to your site. So everybody needs to be educated. Not only they should understand what they're doing, but what the risk of doing differently is, and how important this thing is to decarbonize and to bring the organic diversion to the right places. So there's a lot of education that is required. But more importantly, even as developers, to our own self, like, educating ourselves in terms to where the regulations are going, where the carbon offset mechanism is going. Just to name a few, I will use this to talk about it. Like, when the EPA regulations and the CAR framework was set up, say, for example, it was assumed that the methane capture rate in a landfill is 75%. Just let it sink for a minute. It is assumed. There is no scientific validation for that, but it was assumed, and that is what we have in the framework. Fast forward 20 years now, you have satellites, you have drones, you have all the technologies, you have all the live sensors. And Google have partnered with a lot of technical science companies now, and they have a website and portal where you can go and open the landfill next to you. And you can actually see how much methane that landfill is emitting. And you will be surprised that the capture rate is less than 40%. So think of the difference of what food waste digesters can do. This is education. If we understand what value this brings to us, how much carbon diversion are we doing through these food waste digesters, this gives us the moral right thing to do kind of attitudes, that food waste digesters are much better than landfill. We cannot just assume that if food waste digester doesn't come on, we can still capture 75% in the landfill, because the reality is it doesn't capture 75%. It is proven by science. It is proven by technology. It is widely available in databases now. I think we just have to make sure that we lobby for it and take away that reluctance of not changing this number, because this will improve our baseline. This will improve our CI baseline. This will improve the value of your product. This will improve the financial viability of these projects. So I'm just using education as one example, just fun information, and all of us knowing about it will change the course.
Yeah, I think, to paraphrase, what he's saying is that anaerobic digestion isn't a household name, and we all have to do our part on the education front. Yeah.
I have one more point to that again. All very valid points, but community engagement I already had mentioned, but beyond that, to have the community understand what anaerobic digestion is fine, but once the plant is up and operating, to constantly engage with the community and the groups there to make them understand that this is really not a waste. This is a resource that we need to keep away from the hole in the ground that we are burying it in currently, mostly, and use that to produce renewable energy. And for that, we need to educate the consumer to put the right thing in the green bin, for instance. And that starts a lot of times with schools. You need to raise generations to understand that this is not a waste stream, this is a resource that we need to use. Fortunately, I was born in Europe, and many years ago, we already, in the 80s, we separated glass, but not only from the waste stream, we separated it by color. And if you go to a household in Europe right now, they have 5 or 6 different bins in their collection system. We're lucky here if we have 3 bins, with 1 organic bin, hopefully. And so not really community engagement when you build the system and everything else. The community engagement is ongoing. You need to educate, and you need to do spot checks on the collection level, especially if you're dealing with residential waste. And like it is, I keep referring to San Luis Obispo, but we have annual compost giveaway programs. We're fortunate enough that our compost that we create is organic certified, and in order to give back to the community, we have semi-annual compost giveaway programs part of the community. And besides making renewable energy and reducing the use of fossil fuel-based energy needs, we also give back some of the residuals. And that's really an ongoing effort that will never stop as long as that plant is in operation.
That's a good example of community engagement, with hands-on community engagement. I love that. I also love study tours, just opening your doors. So, there aren't these whispers in the community about what happens over there. When you open it up, invite your local fire department to come and tour the facility so they know, if there's ever an emergency, they know what they're doing. Invite all of your local politicians, the local chamber of commerce, the maybe not the Boy Scouts, I don't know, school classes, that's probably a good idea. Science teachers. So that it's you can actually, get lots and lots of different benefits and you can provide benefits to the community and help them kind of appreciate what you're bringing besides just, the tax base. There's the tax base. Do we have any of our Danish colleagues in the room? You said 5 or 6 bins. I was just in Denmark a little while ago. They have 10 bins. So we have a little ways to go to catch up to our Danish friends. But okay, so pretty soon I'm going to open it up. If anyone has a burning question, feel free to come up to the mic. What topics have we missed, you guys? What have we not talked about? Are we scaring you guys away? These are all of the problems. But I think we actually, there's so many solutions. There's so many solutions in terms of making the offtake energy contracts more secure, about valuing that about properly valuing the recycling of the nutrients, about putting the proper numbers on the avoided methane mitigation. There's just, one of the benefits of being kind of in these early days is that we have huge gains that we can be making on all of these fronts. All right, you guys, anyone want to jump in with a question from the audience? Don't be shy. Is everyone hoping we just get to go to happy hour early? Mark. And please introduce yourself when you at the mic so we know who you are.
Mark Reedy at Kilpatrick Townsend. So I'd like to start off with a couple of comments and maybe you could react to them. So on the development money for development risk, development capital, the Farm Bill is putting the grant program back into the 9003 program, which would enable you to get development capital. Another thing we've suggested to USDA is to take the 9003 money, which there's only 134 million left, instead of using loan guarantees, use loans for development capital for FEL1 through FEL3. And then lastly, on that topic, the DOE collects $500 million a year on interest from their loan guarantee program. And what do they do with it? They just give it back to Treasury, which is crazy. And they don't have to. There's nothing blocking them. So we've suggested to them that they make that available for FEL1 through 3 and working capital. Then on the feedstock for Ashwani, we're working with a group that's developing a feedstock insurance policy that could protect risks with quality and quantity. So quality, as you know, especially in food waste, when you're going run to run, you have trouble guaranteeing that the specifications will all be the same. So it would protect that. It would also protect quantity. You know, just because you've got a feedstock agreement into an area doesn't mean there aren't 100 other people doing the same thing and it gets depleted. So it would protect against the quantity aspect. So I use those as comments, but would like reactions from the panel. Thanks.
Can you help us with our contamination issues and food waste? Anyone want to react?
Comment to the feedstock side of things. Absolutely. Feedstock quality is also very important, right? Feedstock specifications need to be established when developing a project and need to be maintained on a daily basis, right? So that goes to your point of securing feedstock quality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all, those are helpful contributions, Mark. I think that's great. Recycle that money.
Yeah, Gonçalo Batista from Permastore. I live in the UK, and one of the issues we've got in the UK is that food waste is not collected separately. And I understand even in the UK, there's legislation now saying that the councils have to do so. And I know in the United States, there's also food waste directives that are mandating that for certain states. But is there funding in place to put on all that infrastructure in terms of having different bins, different trucks to collect, and so on, that will enable this food waste management separately, or is it still quite far away from reality?
So I think the question was, if I heard you well, is there funding for all of the bins and things that are needed to collect the food waste? And so what I would say just first is that that's specifically for residential food waste. And there's a huge amount of food waste in the commercial sector, you know, think hospitals, grocery stores, things like that. And then there's also a huge amount of food waste in the industrial sector. Think food manufacturers, all the leftovers from your tomato sauce and all those things. So that's just one, and none of that's needed for that. So on the bins, you know, this is, again, a public policy decision. And so it's going to be jurisdiction by jurisdiction. You know, my understanding is Scotland has a bin in every single household. And so they managed to do it. And you know, so I think what we can do in part of this education is giving them creative ideas. You know, put an extra little fee on garbage, make that more expensive, and then use that to fund the green bin, you know, the bin program. Oh, so the Scottish government folks were telling me that every house has a little like kitchen top. No. What do you know? A politician lied. Amazing.
But there are some technology innovations that can take commingled waste, municipal and organic waste mixed up. There are some technical solutions for that, and there are also technologies on the anaerobic digestion on the back end of it, which can take a lot more contaminated waste. You can talk more about it, and you can always screen and take the leachate out and do a multiple stage anaerobic digestion. So it's not the end of the road. If you really want to divert organics out of the waste, we can do it even if it is not segregated on the front end. It just costs a little more.
Right, and the catch there is that if you have a source-separated organic feedstock, it will be, relatively speaking, clean. Meaning there most likely will not be any batteries or any large amount of batteries and heavy metals in it. So if you have let's say a 3-bin collection program where you have a dedicated organics bin, you will most likely get a digestate or a compost or a residual material besides the RNG that is of value. Meaning if anaerobic digesters are very much like computers, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you put good feedstock in, you will get most likely a digestate that you can make into organic compost and have a liquid stream that can be used to apply as a soil amendment to bring nutrients back to farm fields. If you have a organic fraction from municipal solid waste, which comes off a dirty MRF, a material recovery facility, when you do not have a 3-bin collection program on the residential level, you are putting this waste stream, the gray bin, through a very extensive separation process where you pull out recyclables, metals, and all this, and eventually there be an organic stream coming off that. And that's what's called OFMSW, organic fraction from MSW. And that most likely will have a lot of sand, a lot of clay, glass bits, and probably also heavy metals in it from batteries and things like that. And then you render your digestate stream probably not usable for agricultural applications. I know in Europe we have several systems using that feedstock, that highly contaminated feedstock. The digestion part is not the problem. Getting out the gas is not the problem, but what do you do with the leftovers? In Spain was the only country that I know of where for a long time they were allowed to apply that compost that came out of that digestate to olive yards, basically, as a non-food contact type soil amendment. But then the regulations changed, and now they have nowhere to go with this feedstock, with this compost or the residual. So you're going to pay for it one way or another. You either pay for a collection program that gives you a clean feedstock, and then you have a residual material that you can use, or you don't have separate collection and you have to pay for the material to be disposed of because you cannot use it in agriculture as fossil fuel-based fertilizer replacement. So there's no magic bullet here, right? You're going to have to spend money. And to your question, part of the problem in the United States is that every state has a different law, right? In California, we have SB 1383. Some other states now have diversion laws or frameworks thereof, which is great. But we have a long way to go.
Yep. That's all super, super good points. I want to come back to your point. I think, a number of folks would say that our food waste diversion laws in the US just haven't really worked. We still have 25% of the material going to landfills in America is food. So I think that's pretty good evidence that they're not working. So we do need to get a lot of these solutions in place. And one topic that I hear a lot of our team kind of talking about on the ground is the haulers and the role of the haulers. Do you guys want to weigh in on that and what we need to do to kind of change some of those incentive structures to make this more viable?
So on the hauler side, like at Vanguard, we have created to take destiny in our own hands kind of attitude, wherein we are complementing our organic diversion group, which is basically responsible for not only contracting the food waste and the beverage waste directly with, we have also set up along with couple of years back with Starbucks, Unilever, and Dairy Farms of Canada, we set up this farm-powered strategic alliance. And through that, we started contracting the nationwide food and beverage waste. And we established internally the organic diversion team, which does their own fleet management and pickup and drop off. So that way, we are in the business of organic collection and diversion. But once the concentration of food and organics in a particular region reach a tipping point or a threshold where we can develop anaerobic digester, we go in and do that. So our reliance on haulers is kind of limited in our business. So.
In our world, the reliance of haulers is huge because they have most of the time the control over the feedstock, and they dictate where that feedstock is going, and they're running a business. So most likely that feedstock goes to wherever the lowest tipping fee is. So that's where legislation comes back in, that you have to have policy dictate to have these organics diverted from landfill and go to a higher and better use. And it all kind of, there's a synergy that has to play together. And if the haulers are forced to do that, then we can finance and create our projects. And if that's not the case, they will go to the landfill that's charging them $35 a ton, rather than going to an anaerobic digester that is $95 a ton, right? So it's kind of this, again, puzzle pieces that need to all fall into place.
Yeah, and to your,
Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say I have a really good example for that. There was one project I worked on it was a regional project where the hauled high-strength waste, the cheapest disposal for that waste was to land apply it. Well, they were trying to get that high-strength waste into a digester and produce, digestate for fertilizer and renewable natural gas. And that was one of the large hurdles that the region had to overcome. And so they were looking at policy on how you can require waste to be handled in different ways. And then two, they were looking at doing an RFP process, and that RFP process would still allow them to have a competitive market to price the hauling and tipping fees for that project.
so another topic that I would argue is a challenge is lack of enough skilled labor, so the workforce. Does anyone want to comment on that, or should we just say we need it? It's a challenge. We need go ABC with all of your trainings. Way to go.
That was part of the internal education that I was talking about, because it's hard to find anaerobic digestion engineer or a developer out in the market. And if you are in this effervescence growth phase, as we are in North America right now, and every company is trying to expand, like there is definitely a dearth of talented and skilled manpower out there. So having a concept within the company wherein you train the trainer kind of approach, because that's the only way to continuously expand and still bring in the skills within the company. It's definitely a big challenge. I think it can be a limiting factor if the development companies don't take this seriously, because there's not so much skill out there, and there's not so much talent that can deliver all these projects at the pace at which we are expecting these projects to be delivered.
Yeah. So,
That's a question. Right?
oh, yeah, just come right up to the mic, please. I was going to manufacture a conflict on the panel just so we could get some more debate going, but you saved me. Yes, 2 questions, 3. Oh, it took you guys a little while to get warmed up. All right.
Hey, Tim Fairley-Wax, University of Michigan. I know you talked a little bit about heavy metals being a digestate disposal issue. I think for a lot of food waste projects, specifically if you're depackaging microplastics, can also be an issue. So I was curious, if any of the projects that you've been running have run into microplastics disposal issues, or how you manage that specifically when you're depackaging, food and then putting it into a digester.
I would like to differentiate microplastic with macroplastic, because they're 2 very different topics, and let's not mix them up because it creates a wrong communication. Microplastic is in our veins right now going around, and there is no way you can segregate that because it's already there. We can definitely work on macroplastic, and every technology should work on macroplastic. So there are different kind of polymers that come in with the packaging industry. And when they go through a hammer mill or shredding or any kind of squeezing, the way they split or break themselves up and go through, every screen has a 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional way how they cross over the screen. So it is very important for developers to understand when they bring in food waste, also to educate the food waste guys what kind of packaging works for microplastic, which does not work for microplastic, and also the speed and the screen size of the hammer mill, and a downstream cleaning. There you can do it two ways. You can do it on the organic pulp side before the digester. You can do it on the digestate side where you can screen all this plastic and fiber and make sure nothing goes through the digestate. But I 100% agree with you. This is something that should be taken very, very seriously, and we should make sure that no macroplastic leaves the plant, and this should always be captured. Yes.
Yeah, so currently, are you doing any screening on the digestate backend? Just because I think from like a technological standpoint, that seems either really costly or challenging to do.
There are stain presses. There is 3 manufacturers out in US. There are some European manufacturers that can deal with this on the digestate side. There are technologies as dynamic cyclones or horizontal decanter kind of things that can deal with it on the front end side. So there are solutions out there.
Yeah, I also want to just zoom out a bit and point out that we really need to take a systems approach. And, you know, if the goal is to develop a circular economy, which I would argue it is, then we can't, you know, the folks that are trying to recycle our waste shouldn't get beat up because the food companies are using plastics instead of compostables, instead of bioplastics. So I think that's another thing that I would really like to see this industry do, is push really hard again in the policy realm for a transition to away from plastics to these bio-based products, so that we can actually be producing, building organics campuses where we're taking in organic waste and we're producing valuable fertilizers, we're producing bio products and packaging materials and things like that, so that we don't have to have microplastics in our blood and plastic in our farmland. So anyway.
Thank you.
That was an applause line, but it's fine, you guys. You're already asleep, it's cool.
Hi, my name is Marcello Piveri. I'm with the University of Illinois Chicago. I'm Italian, by the way. We have 5 beans, I think, there, so we are not as good as Denmark, but better than US, I guess. Actually, the gentleman here anticipated me. My question was kind of the same, but since I walked from there, I'm going to ask anyway. I was curious to know what thought you have about microplastic and also the PFAS, so the so-called forever chemicals that are kind of jeopardizing food waste recycling and also wastewater digestate for application in agriculture. Thank you.
I wondered if we'd get, yeah, it took us to the very end to get a PFAS question. So thank you. I would just start off and then would love to get you guys to jump in. I would just suggest that, again, the folks receiving the waste, you know, they have, it's hard work. We're dealing with stinky, heavy, you know, difficult material. And this is really important work. That's thankless work. And now on top of that, like, we're having to deal with like the chemical contaminants in all of this stinky waste. So I really think we need to go upstream and stop, manufacturers need to stop using these chemicals and stop making them.
Right now, source reduction is the only solution for PFAS, right? Right. I mean,
So
wastewater don't treat PFAS, so. Yeah.
Which country is it on there? I couldn't hear, I'm sorry.
I say source reduction or
Source reduction,
pollution
gotcha.
prevention, just to prevent the PFAS.
I think we're just about out of time, so I think we can debate all of this with some alcoholic beverages or non-alcoholic beverages. Because
That's an excellent idea, buddy.
I do think there's lots of companies that are working on solutions, even for, because there's so much out there in the environment already. So I think there's some interesting developments there. But I just want to give you guys an opportunity are there any last comments you want to make before we wrap up? And thank you all for sticking with us through this last session. You guys are champs. Any last comments? Good. All right, thank you.